1973, one of the most documented cases of alien abduction in ufology history took place in Pascagoula, Mississippi. Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker were fishing one night on the river when their lives were changed forever. In the years that have passed since that time, Philip Mantle and Dr. Irena Scott thoroughly investigated and verified the case, as no one in ufology has ever done before. Let's have a conversation with Philip Mantle.
I'd like to start by having you bring our audience up to date on your work that you've been doing since the last time we spoke, and your book, your rather beautiful large book that you did with Dr. Irena Scott. Uh, you've done another book, and you've also did 3 documentaries as well. Could you tell the audience about that?
Yeah, I mean, I worked with Dr. Irena Scott, who I know you've spoken to and you've interviewed, a glorious lady.
She's wonderful. I
Absolutely.
really like her.
I mean, I could never have believed when I started in this business, Steve, that I'd be co-authoring a book with such a lady, and her academic background. And what we did, of course, when I published some of Irena's books to begin with. That's how I got to know her. I have my own little publishing venture, Flying Disc Press. And when we started to track down witnesses to the Pascagoula case, these were independent eyewitnesses in and around the area. Yes, I spoke to them on the phone or email or whatever, but we needed somebody out in the States to do it. I kept getting the time wrong and things like that, And then they have this strange sounding man from across the Atlantic telephoning them. So I asked Irena if she'd, come on board, so to speak. And I think to date, she has interviewed over 50 separate witnesses over the last few years. The book you're referring to, we co-authored it. It was called Beyond Reasonable Doubt, the Pascagoula Alien Abduction. Now,
Correct.
It had a working title, which wasn't that. And I was watching a courtroom drama on TV one night, and the lawyer said, we have to prove this beyond a reasonable doubt. And I thought, bingo, that's the title for our book. And I emailed Irena and said, what do you think to this? And she said, yes, great. Because what we honestly believed, Steve, we believed if we could take all that evidence into a court, we could prove not that Calvin and Charlie were abducted by aliens, but that something extraordinary happened that night. And we thought that's as far as we'll go now. We might get 1 or 2 more witnesses. Sadly, Calvin passed away in 2023. Yes. I spoke to him on the telephone about 3 days before he died. He and I had become very good friends over the last 5 years. I published his 2 books in 2018 and 2019. And I told him I loved him like a brother. I said, lots of people out there will be saddened when he passes, but we still had a laugh. He still managed to chuckle, and he passed away. And I thought that be the end of it, Steve. I promised him I'd be the torchbearer for the case. Irena volunteered that as well. But much to my surprise, it didn't end there. So more information was acquired. Some of that was yet more witnesses who stepped forward, or we located, one way or another. And again, Irena interviewed them. But there was lots of things missing, Steve, that we hadn't been able to find, one of which was the files from the UFO group APRO, the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization. They were probably one of the main UFO groups back in 1973. And of course, when this incident happened on October the 11th, they sent Dr. James Harder there. And Hynek arrived a couple at the same time. And APRO paid for Dr. Harder to be there. So, we thought, well, where is the file? There must be some files about this somewhere. And we found out that the APRO files were stored by a gentleman and we wouldn't give access to them. There was estimated to be 15,000 files. And he looked after them, don't get me wrong, and he was very nice. I managed to find him and contact him. He was very nice and polite. But getting access was, for whatever reason, what just wasn't to be. Then, completely out of the blue, he contacted, in confidence to begin with, a chap by the name of David Marler. David's in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He's the director of the National UFO Historical Records Center. He started that himself, and other donations of files have been given to him. And this gentleman by the name of Brian went to see him and donated all of the APRO files, the complete lot. He even transported them to David himself in a truck. And hey presto, in amongst those files, David emailed me and knew of our involvement in this incident. He said, have you got this, Philip? And have you got that? And of course, we hadn't. And what David located in these files, Steve, was a number of audio recordings made in the following days after the encounter on October the 11th, one of which is Dr. Hynek interviewing the Sheriff Fred Diamond. He's interviewing him in a very informal manner. I don't know if you ever saw Hynek speak on TV. It was very easygoing, very laid back. Yeah. Then we have Dr. James Harder at a press conference. So the media are asking him questions. For some reason, the first half of that, you can't hear the questions, you just hear his answers. And then all of a sudden you hear both. But these recordings were unique, Steve. I don't think anyone had ever played them since the day they were made, over 50 years ago. So it's a real piece of UFO history. So they're all featured in the new book. I transcribed it, verbatim. The new book's Pascagoula Uncovered, Witnesses, Files, and Audio Tapes.
Thank you for sending me a pre-copy. I really appreciate that.
My pleasure. And of course, what I do now and again, Steve, we know there's tons of stuff online on the internet. I'll have a little look sometimes. Most of the time, it's just stuff I've seen before.
But a lot of rubbish.
Well, yeah, a lot. Some interesting stuff, but I've already seen it, But I found a little website set up by a local journalist. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. And he'd interviewed a few people who were witnesses to these events in and around Pascagoula at that time, a couple of whom were police officers. And he embedded the little videos within this website. And hey, presto, there's Calvin Parker. But not the 1973 Calvin. He's a good 20 years gone since then. Now, it's a little video of Calvin, and he starts talking about what happened in 1973, and he's very passionate about it. He's very emotional. And he tells that story, which is in the new book as well. I've for those that don't know it. And then he turns around to face the camera again, and he talks about another encounter at a place called Baldwin in Louisiana in 1992. And he tells the story of, he was working I believe in the oil industry in that era. And him and his colleague were heading to where they're going to be working the next day. And the car radio malfunctioned. He pulled over, and he felt compelled to go into the woods, and off he went, and he found the UFO with the same female being he'd encountered before, and some of these tall, ugly creatures, and he conversed with her, and she explained that they had been through catastrophe on their planet before, and they wanted us here on Earth to avoid that, nuclear war, etc., etc. And he was talking to her about it, but he forgot about his friend. His friend was still sat in the truck. So Calvin says, I've got to go now. And as he came out, his friend appeared. I think he had a tire iron in his hand. He thought something had happened to Calvin. Now, like I said, I became very good friends with Calvin. We would speak every week on Skype, sometimes twice a week. In between, it would be text messages or emails. But nowhere did he mention anything about anything that had happened to him in 1992. Not a word. What he did tell me was that in that period, he was earning a good salary. So him and Charles Hickson, came up with this idea to set up their own little TV show on a local cable station. And they would interview others who would have similar experiences. And I know he interviewed people because he told me he just couldn't remember their names. And I think this is the video that he used himself. So he's filmed himself, if you like. This isn't some journalist that's done it. This is Calvin that was going to use it on this little cable show that never got off the ground. And I found an article that Calvin was responsible for the year after, in 1993. And he says he's going to this particular conference in America and he's going to reveal everything. He's going to tell everybody everything. And the article was in the conference proceedings. But of course, he never went to this conference. And I confirmed that with my friend and colleague, Kevin Randall, because Kevin was at that event. So I said to Kevin, did Calvin turn up? And he said, no, no sign of Calvin. So it was that era when they were going to do this. So the best way for me to do anything with that, Steve, is just to transcribe everything he said, verbatim. It's there and it's in the book. And at some point we will release the video and the audio, to accompany it. Some people can see it for themselves. And it's just mind-boggling. I mean,
I bet it is.
Yeah, we've uncovered all kinds of things in this case, none of which we expected, but this was the last thing I expected. And as I told you about the APRO files that were uncovered, I was then contacted by a gentleman called Mr. Van Payne. And he said to me, I think I've got the first ever interview with Charlie and Calvin after their encounter. And it was done by me. And I said, okay. And he said, I was a local journalist, but a photojournalist. So he wasn't just somebody who scribbled it down on a pad. And he said, the night of the incident, so October the 11th, 1973, he was only a young fella. He hadn't been at it long. He said, I got a tip. I got a tip from the sheriff's department that something was going off. He said, but by the time I got there, it was all over with. They had gone. So he said, I went back to the sheriff's department the following morning. This is Jackson County Sheriff's Department. And he said, I'd missed them again. They'd gone to the Singing River Hospital. Charlie and Calvin were taken to the hospital for a quick checkup. So he went to the hospital and, hey presto, he missed them again. But he found out they were now en route to Keesler Air Force Base to be checked for radiation. That's about 30 or 40 miles from Pascagoula. So off he goes. I
was going to ask about that.
Yeah, he went to Keesler, and obviously they wouldn't let him in, so he waited outside. And hey presto, Charlie and Calvin turn up. And he asked for an interview. And initially they say no, but he persuades them, and the only way they'll be interviewed, Steve, is with their backs to the camera. So the interview on camera is these two guys with their backs to it. Mr. Van Payne is in between them, but you can see his face on the microphone, and he interviews them. And I don't know about the first interview, but it's certainly the first on-camera interview that they did. There's no smoking gun there. They repeated what we already knew. But again, it's a piece of history. However, what was interesting is, of course, what else was on the film. I think he'd used 16 millimeter film at that point. He'd since had it digitized. And of course, he might have had to buy that himself. He's not going to waste it. Further along on the tape, there is an interview with a gentleman who was the meteorologist for the local civil defence. And hey presto, he caught something on radar that night that he could not fathom. So we have that interview as well. And then it moves along, and there's another gentleman interviewed. He's a local cab driver. He claimed he saw this UFO land and these creatures come out and come up to his vehicle. One thing he forgot is that his buddy was in a taxi behind him, and his buddy said there was nothing landed. He's making it up. So we have Charlie and Calvin being interviewed. We have the meteorologist from the civil defence, and then we have a guy trying to get in on the act and perpetrate a hoax. But it was soon uncovered. And all this had never been seen anywhere apart from maybe a minute or two on the local news bulletin. And we have it all. So again, it's all transcribed. It's all in the new book.
Wow. And so you did talk to me about doing another documentary. Is this footage and these videos that have been digitized planned to be used?
What I've done in the meantime since Calvin passed, I worked with a gentleman by the name of Darcy Weir. He's a producer in Canada. Mm-hmm. And we have made a 4-part documentary series called simply Pascagoula 73. It's on Amazon Prime, so if you're an Amazon Prime subscriber, you can watch all 4 free. And there is Charlie and Calvin's story told in full. We have the new witness, Maria Blair, told in full, a bit about myself. And we have used a lot of archive film. We haven't used any of this yet because a lot of this came in after we'd already made that. It was too late. And what we were able to do on Pascagoula 73 is use some of the hypnosis that Calvin had done. I had it filmed. And Maria Blair, a new witness by the name of Maria Blair. Again, we filmed her hypnosis and we used sections of it for the first time. And it's there.
I watched that.
Yeah.
I watched that. You sent it to me in a link. Yeah. That was fascinating.
So what we now have, you see, Steve, since then, is we thought we'd told most of the story then, but we haven't. Because we have all this new material, plus other stuff that we just weren't able to use, otherwise we'd have gone on forever. For example, Charles Hickson was hypnotized twice by the late Bud Hopkins in the 1980s.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I have the audio tapes of that. I have the tapes. Calvin was hypnotized by Bud Hopkins in 1993. I have the recording of that as well. So we've got lots and lots of really fascinating historical information about this case. And it's all in Pascagoula Uncovered. It's all in there. But a lot of it is visual and audio, Steve. So what we want to do is say, right, we've come together, myself, Dr. Irena Scott and another young fella, and our intention is to make possibly a 6-part series. We'll self-fund it, and we'll pack as much of this information in as we can, and then just say, look, here it is. You decide for yourself what happened in and around that area on that night. And, for me, I'm lost. Me and Calvin used to laugh. We'd say, "What's going to happen next?" And of course, sadly, he hasn't seen a lot of this new. There's another TV show in this new book. Again, it's from the early 1990s, I believe, and it's Charlie and Calvin stuck in a TV studio being interviewed.
I
And
think
I don't,
I think I've seen that one.
yeah.
Yeah.
But again, it was only on local TV, so whoever's viewed it can't be that many. But again,
No.
it all adds to the mixture of this historical case. Again, Calvin is talking about he's going to tell everything where he'd never said a word before.
I was just looking at the book because I have it
Yeah.
over here on the other computer. You knew them very well, and what I found interesting was the conversation he had with the lady and the two strange looking creatures. Do you think either one of them ever talked about everything that had happened to him, or do you think they held back simply because they felt, as unbelievable as the whole thing is to most human beings, that it might be going too far to reveal certain information? Because I know this among the ranks of people I know, including myself, who have experienced what they've experienced, that we tend to do that.
What the only thing that I think Calvin held back is this incident in 1992. Why, I have no idea, Steve. Had I come across it while Calvin was still alive, I would have certainly, asked him about it. Calvin was a lovely, lovely guy,
Mm-hmm.
but he was also the type of guy that he would only tell you things when he was ready. For example, Calvin's son died, and I knew his son had died, but it took him, I don't know, a couple of years for him to tell me how it had happened, because obviously it was very personal to him and it was very upsetting, very traumatic. I understand that. It's the same about what happened that night on October the 11th, 1973. Calvin was a young fella. He hadn't seen much of the world. He was only 18. He was as tough as they come, Steve. He told me, he said, me and my younger brother, Ricky, went to the same school. So Ricky was the brains, I was the brawn. Anybody mess with Ricky, they got to deal with me. I don't think he was one for starting a fight, but I think he was one for finishing one.
Right.
And so, of course, when the incident happened on October the 11th, 1973, Calvin couldn't fight back. For the first time in his life, he was unable to stand up for himself. He was totally paralyzed. They removed his clothing, which was deeply distressing and embarrassing to him. And it took him quite a while before he told me about this. And I understand, why. And I understand how traumatized he was. And so slowly but surely, he told me certain things. For example, another thing we have in the book is just about a year after the encounter in 1973. Calvin's married now to his fiancée, Waynette. Calvin joined the Marine Corps. And he joined the Marine Corps to get away from the media. If he thought, if I'm in the Marines, I could be sent anywhere in the world. I know the Vietnam War had wound down by that time, although there were still things happening there. But he lasted, I think it was 9 months. That's all he lasted in the Marines. And I managed to get his military record. So I said to him, how did you end up getting a nice discharge? He says, first off, one of the other Marines thought it was funny. He found out about me, thought it was funny. So Calvin, as I'm sure happens with a lot of new recruits, punched his lights out. So he got in trouble for that. And then he said, a journalist found me. So he said, I went to see my commanding officer and tell him, and I told him the story of what had happened to me. And he says, it's all right, son, we'll get you a conditional discharge and you can be gone. They won't know where you are. So that was the lengths that Calvin was prepared to go to keep himself away from the media. He wasn't bothered too much about Joe Public, but the media. And again, his military records are published in the book for the first time, so you can see for yourself. And it's just an example of how traumatized he was, Steve.
Yeah, well, I mean, here he is, completely detached in any way, shape, or form in his life that he was living up to that point from a subject matter such as this one. And this is how it is with many of the people that I've worked with who they don't want to talk publicly about it, and they always tell me, they always start off the same way. I'm going to tell you something you're going to find hard to believe or difficult to believe, or it's fantastic, but it really happened. And I have to sort of laugh, and sometimes I do, and they look at me kind of funny. I said, no, you don't understand. I hear this every time, and I understand it. I understand that you're not someone who was involved in UFO research or UFO interests at all. You didn't go to the alien conventions or any of that kind of thing. You were simply minding your own business, and you experienced something that was completely extraordinary and out of line with your normal day-to-day life. And all at once you realize, oh, those other people who talked about this, and I thought they were nuts. Now I understand what's going on. Now they're going to think I'm nuts.
Yeah. And
I'm sure you get.
Well, going back to Calvin's time as well, I mean, who would you turn to?
Well, back then, geez.
Well, I'll give you an example.
There was Hynek. That was about it. I mean, there were others. Was Stanton working then yet?
Frequent. Stanton was there, but
he was a wonderful human being. He would listen to you.
But if you don't know anything about this subject, those names would be meaningless to you. You wouldn't have known them. They were fortunate that Dr. Harder and Dr. Hynek were there within no time at all.
Well, yeah.
And I spoke to one gentleman. This is the way things happen with this case, Steve. Calvin was doing a book signing in Pascagoula, and his wife Waynette is sat next to him. So you come up, speak to Calvin. Yeah, I'll sign your book. He gives it to Waynette. She takes the money, and away they go. This gentleman, an oldish guy, said, "Oh, I saw that thing that night," and he walked away. Now, fortunately, somebody was taking photographs. And we have a photograph of this gentleman, a white-haired gentleman, buying the book. So I put it on social media, didn't say anything. I said, I'm just looking to speak to this gentleman. Somebody from, I think it was the local library, contacted us and said, I know who he is. So then I explained why we wanted to speak to him. And I said, it can be done in confidence, there's no problem. She said, I'll ask. Anyway, it came back, yeah, I'll speak to you. It was a chap called Mr. Lewis Lee. Back in 1973, Mr. Lee was working in the shipyard on the other side of the river that night. He was a crane driver. And he said, Philip, my cab was about 10 or 12 feet off the ground. And he said, as soon as I got in it that night, I could see this darn thing out over the river. Not up in the sky, over the river. And he described it, and he said it was almost like a jewel. It was almost transparent in the middle. It was beautiful. And he said, and he watched it for some time, Steve. It wasn't a quick look.
Right.
He said, the only reason I took my eyes off it was because my colleague down below was shouting for me to do something. So I had to go and tend to that. And then when I looked back, it had gone. And that is literally the opposite side of the river from where Charlie and Calvin were in the shipyard. And I said to him, did you report it to anyone? And he says, Philip, there is no Ghostbusters in 1973. Who the hell am I going to report it to? He said, I told my family and that's it.
Yeah, I hadn't worked on that movie yet at that time.
but
I
also,
would.
Yeah, but also, I mentioned the guy in charge at the sheriff's department was Sheriff Fred Diamond. And we actually have Charlie Hickson's conversation with Fred Diamond that night in the sheriff's office. We have it. We have the recording. But what is interesting, Sheriff Fred Diamond saw his own UFO 2 days later, and sadly he's passed away. But we have some vintage recordings of him talking about it. But his son was actually the police dispatcher in charge that night. So when Charlie Hickson dialed the emergency services to get through to the police, it was his son, Mick Diamond, that he spoke to. And Mr. Diamond is still alive, and he gave, we contacted him, and he said, Philip, he says, that night I took at least 50 reports of UFOs on the telephone. And he said, when I finished my shift, I went back to the police station, and there were people there in person reporting them, including a local clergyman. Now, this is where we started off looking for other witnesses, Steve. When Calvin's book came out in 2018, I was contacted by a gentleman in Greece, of all places. He'd been a UFO researcher, and his favourite case was the Pascagoula case. And he was also, at that time, in the Greek Merchant Navy. He was a radio operator. Mm-hmm. And in 1981, so 8 years after the event, the ship he was on actually docked in Pascagoula. And he got several days' leave. So he used to write for a UFO magazine. So he set off to get an interview with Charlie Hickson, which he did. And he then went to the police station and said, can you help me find anyone else? And they said, have you spoken to Pastor Sigalis? He saw something that night. No idea who you're talking about. So they gave him his name and address. This gentleman, Stephanos, from Greece, literally went up and knocked on his door, and he got an interview with him. Now, Pastor Sigalis, with a chap by the name of Don Broadhurst, who was from the probation department, that night of October the 11th, 1973, along with a young lady in the back of the car. She was a church volunteer. They were going to an event that was sponsored by the church, and it was for people who had alcohol problems. So as they're heading out of town on the main road, she's looking out of the side window, and she sees this thing coming, and she alerts them to it, and it went right across the road in front of them.
Wow.
So heading in the general direction again of where Charlie and Calvin were. What Stephanos did, he took a photograph of that area, and he got Mr. Pastor Sigalis to draw the thing in the sky where it was. And it's pretty similar to what they saw. Now, by the time we spoke to Stephanos, Pastor Sigalis was no longer alive. The gentleman sitting next to him, Mr. Broadhurst, again, was no longer alive. But we thought, Steve, what about this young lady in the back of the car? Who the hell was she?
Yeah.
So we managed to get a name for her. I think we got it in an old newspaper cutting. She wasn't from the area. She'd only been there a couple of years. She was a local teacher at the school. She was called Jo Ann Hallmark. We even found an old photograph of her from 1974, a black and white one. So I looked online and I found a couple of social media accounts for somebody with that name who seemed to fit the bill, but they hadn't been used in years, Steve. So I left it. Maybe a year later, I went back and I had another look. Still no use. However, there was a name of a church on this account. So I literally put the church name in Google, and hey presto, I found it. It was now in Maryland. I've no idea where that is geographically in the States, but that's where it was. So not only that, the church had its own website, and I went on it, and there was a couple of sermons you could download. And the person narrating these sermons was called Hallmark. And I'm thinking, could it be her husband or could it be sons? Now, the church had a general email address, church info, whatever. Well, I said, I'm looking to speak to this lady. She worked with Pastor Sigalas in 1973 in Pascagoula. That's all I mentioned. About 3 weeks later, she replied. She confirmed she'd worked with Pastor Sigalas, and then I had to explain to her why we wanted to speak to her. So I did. I sent her the black and white photograph we got of her. She came back again a few weeks later, sent me a photograph of what she looks like now, and verified everything that we found out. And then she gave us a telephone number, and Dr. Scott interviewed her on the phone. So we had a witness again from that night. She was one of three, and some media online said, "Oh, these people are stepping forward for their 15 minutes of fame." Well, this lady didn't step forward. We just were lucky that we were able to find her, and she was happy enough to speak to us. But that set us off, and we thought, well, if there's one, surely there could be more, because where they were fishing that night, Steve, on the Pascagoula River, is not an out-of-the-way place. Mm-hmm. You've got two bridges going over the river either side of you. You've got ships going up and down, little boats, shipbuilding.
It's very accessible.
Yeah, there's commercial and residential properties behind them. And one of the gentlemen that did step forward, it was called Charles Rusty Anderson. And he says, that night, Philip, my wife and I had been out and we were going back home. We were going over the bridge, over the river. And he said, I saw this blue thing. But in mind, Charlie and Calvin talked about the blue lights on this thing. He says, as I'm going over the bridge, it's actually down below me. He said, I thought it was going to crash. It was that low. The next day, he went to his aunts who lived down by the river, and he said, before I'd said anything, she said, you never guess what I saw that night.
Wow.
So what happened was, at some point, a few years later, Mr. Anderson put a little message, he has a Facebook page, put a little message up, just a couple of lines about seeing the thing that night. One of the comments below was from a lady with a completely different name. She was called Pamela Rayleigh Eves. And she said, I saw that thing that night. Words to that effect. So I left her a message. Again, she obliged us with an interview. Pamela was actually the cousin of Mr. Anderson. But neither of them knew that the other had a sighting that night.
Had seen it, yeah.
Now, where Pamela lived, she lived in the opposite direction, about a mile away. She says, I was putting my children to bed that night, and our house overlooked the river. And as I'm closing the bedroom curtains, I see this blue thing out over the river. So you had Charlie and Calvin on the river. You have Mr. Anderson going over the bridge to the left. You have Mrs. Eves to the right, about a mile away. And then you've got Mr. Lee opposite you, in the shipyard. So you've got them all around you pretty much. And then, of course, one of the most interesting witnesses is Maria Blair. Now, when Calvin first decided to write his book and let me publish it, he was interviewed by a local journalist called Karen Nelson. And she was a bit skeptical to begin with, but she went and met Calvin. He went down to the location. And not only did she write an article, Steve, she made a little film. So when she published it online, you get the written article and you get the little video embedded in it. Somebody took that and put it on YouTube. And I'm reading the comments, and there were a lot. And one of the comments was, my mother and father were on the opposite side of the river that night. They too saw the UFO. So I managed to find this person. It was a young lady. I said, can we speak to your mum and dad? She says, yeah, I'll ask. And they agreed, and it was Maria and Jerry Blair. Now, I spoke to Maria first on the telephone. Maria said to us, my husband worked offshore. And what they used to do, they used to supply the oil rigs offshore. And he was going to work that night. So we went to this little pier, and the boat was there, but the boss hasn't turned up. It was late. So we're sitting in the car waiting for the boss. My husband's not in the best of moods. She said, "I've seen this blue thing come down the river. And it stops opposite us." And she says, "It's either lost or it's looking for something by the way it moved." And she said, "I know the area. I know there's no airport there. There's no helicopters there, you know." They then decide to walk down this pier and put her husband's belongings onto this little boat, even though the boss hadn't turned up yet. And she says, as we're walking down the pier, there's this huge splash in the water next to her. And out of the water came this, these are her words, this grey man. And it stood literally right up to her nose to nose, Steve. And then it went back down in the water and she never saw it come up again. She ran, she threw her clothes on the boat, you know, her husband's clothes. This was about 9 o'clock, she estimated. Terrified, she had to go back down this pier to go back to the car. And she said, when she got back to the car, she thought it was round about midnight. So I said, okay. And she was very emotional. And she said, Philip, there's something in my peripheral vision that I can't quite make out. There's something else there. So again, I passed this on to Dr. Scott. She interviewed Maria, spoke to Jerry. Jerry wasn't very talkative, Steve, you know, but he was a nice guy. So she kept in touch. Yeah, she kept in touch, did Irena, Dr. Scott. And then in 2019, there was an unveiling of a historical marker down by near the incident that was unveiled by the mayor.
It was a very nice thing they did.
Yeah, it was a local charity had raised money to do it. Calvin was there, of course. Calvin was crying. I mean, he was in tears. But Maria and Jerry Blair turned up and they spoke to the local media about seeing this blue thing. They didn't mention the grey man, this blue thing. Sadly, Jerry took ill and seriously ill. And he was literally in hospital, sat on his hospital bed with Maria there. And he made her call me on the mobile phone. And he said, Mr. Mantle, I lied. I saw everything my wife said she'd seen. I saw it all. And we have this on film as well. She filmed it on the mobile phone. And he's sitting on his hospital bed.
Including the grey man.
He didn't call it the grey man, he called it the grey humanoid. He was having an operation the next day and he wasn't sure if he was going to survive. Thankfully he did, but it couldn't stop his illness. It was a stopgap, you know, he was still very, very ill. And he said to his wife, Maria, we too were abducted that night. And even though I was ill, Steve, Maria was as mad as hell. And she said, you got some talking to do, mister, you know? So he explained what had happened. She said, when he started talking, these things out of my peripheral vision now made sense. It wasn't out of peripheral vision. She got her eyes screwed up, Steve, because this thing was right up to her nose. And she's looking out of the side here and she's looking down the pier. And two of these creatures have got hold of her husband. And he's saying, keep your eye on that one. As if one of them's in charge. You know, So he told the story that they were being abducted and these creatures went back across the water. And it's almost like a deathbed confession, Steve. But it went over a period of weeks and months before, sadly, Mr. Blair passed away. And, you know, make of it what you will. Now, after he died, Maria talked about hypnosis, and we said no to begin with. You know, you're not long, your husband's not long past. She came back a while later, so I said, look, I'll see what I can do. So I just went online, Steve, and I found a few hypnotherapists in and around the area, and I asked if they did regressive hypnosis on email. Mm-hmm. One lady said, yeah. And she was called Crystal Slaughter. She's a professional hypnotherapist. She says, I'll even go to the client's home if that's easier for them. They don't have to come here. So we arranged for Maria to go under hypnosis. And we actually had it at Calvin's house. She'd become friends with Calvin and Wayne now. She knew Calvin had been under hypnosis before, so he knew the ropes, so to speak. I had a local guy who worked for a local TV company to film it. And under hypnosis, she went, and none of us knew what to expect. The hypnotherapist was told nothing, Steve, just date, time, location. That was it. And Maria, again, is quite emotional. She talks about her husband not being there. Where's he gone? Cutting a long story short, she said these creatures were interested in harvesting her eggs, and they wanted to make creatures that could walk amongst us without us recognizing them.
In my research, that's a very significant statement.
Yeah. And what Maria said,
I've heard it before.
Yeah, what Maria then said after was when she, the hypnosis was over with, her opinion was that it was her and her husband who were the target that night, not Charlie and Calvin, because she said we were supposed to be there at that time and at that place. Charlie and Calvin only decided to go fishing on their way home from work that night. So she looked on them as collateral damage.
Huh. That's fascinating.
Yeah. So, we have all this on tape as well. We've recorded it. A few weeks later, the same lady, Crystal, put Calvin under hypnosis. He'd been under it before, which we have on audio, but we didn't have it on video, so we recorded it. And I asked the lady, the hypnotherapist, just ask Calvin one question. Before anything starts, he's sat there with his fishing rod, in the water. Can you just ask him to describe what he sees in front of him? What's the scene like? So he just says, yeah. No, there's cars going over the bridge. There's a little boat going up. It's got the name on it, NOAA. That's a company name. Another bridge there. And right when he's just about to finish, Steve, he says, oh, and there's two figures on the opposite side of the river. And if you don't listen, you miss that bit. Now, those two figures, is that Jerry and Maria Blair?
Oh.
Is it somebody else? I don't know. We'll never know. But it's just a little throwaway thing that he says, So we have all that on film. Then we made the documentary. We wanted to interview Maria, but she just wasn't available. Her life had been turned upside down a little bit when her husband passed. It was a very stressful time for her. So
it is.
There was a local lady by the name of Chelsea Norton Prince. Chelsea runs the Ocean Springs Historical Society. She's interested in the event. They have a Facebook page. She put a couple of things on it. She met Calvin and bought a book off him. She has a picture of her with Calvin. One of their members, a lady by the name of Bethany, contacted her and said, Charles Hickson passed away in 2011. My mum and dad bought his house. In that house were these boxes of papers. Do you want them? No, I have. So she gave them to Chelsea. And Chelsea contacted me and said, would you like a copy? And she digitized the whole lot. And it's from a period round about 1998, 1999, most of it. And again, it's a little snippet of history about the place. One of the interesting things in it, Steve, amongst these papers, is a letter from a guy who was a NASA physicist. And he said, I asked my boss to look into this when it happened, and they refused. And here's who he says he is. I looked him up and found him. I have a picture of him. It's all kosher. So we have that little box of stuff. So what I said to Chelsea was, could you help us? I'd like to get Maria Blair, Mrs. Blair, on camera. We've got her hypnosis, but I'd like her being interviewed on camera. We've not, the guy I'd used before, Steve, was just really busy. He just couldn't do it. I said, but if you've got an iPhone, that will be sufficient.
Yeah. The story is what's important.
Yeah, she says, yeah. So we arranged an interview with Maria Blair and Chelsea, recorded on the iPhone at a local place. She tells the story as, pretty much what I've been telling you, why they were there that night. And I gave Chelsea a few questions to ask her. And I just wanted her to confirm a couple of things. So one question was, when did you first meet Calvin Parker? Operative word being meet. And it would have been when they unveiled the historical marker. That's when she came along and met Calvin for the first time. Maria said, the first time I saw Calvin Parker, she doesn't use the word saw, she's used the Mississippi way of saying it. The first time I seen Calvin Parker was when he got abducted. I could see what was happening.
I knew you were going to say that.
But she said, I thought it was people, men. I didn't know what it was. She said, I didn't know anything about UFOs or anything. I was like, must be men. That's, and even though she's seen the thing herself, her husband, Jerry, of course, said, don't talk to anybody. They'll think we're crazy.
Yep.
So she even claims to have seen Charlie and Calvin while the incident was happening. And of course, she had her own thing to deal with at the same time. And she claims that she has been in contact with these beings, and she'd even had a sighting since then with one night with her granddaughter in the car. So all of that is in the new book. We have the interview with Maria. I have it on video as well. But again, I can't put a video in a book. So
not yet.
Not yet. I transcribed it all, and it's in the new book, Pascagoula Uncovered.
And where is that available, or when is it going to be?
It's out now. It's on. Yeah, it's on Amazon. You can get a softback, a hardback, a Kindle. There is an audio book as well, but it is all narrated. There's none of the the files in there, and I'm just sad Calvin wasn't here to hear what Maria went on to say. He had met her before, and I said, well, why didn't you say something before? She says, nobody asked me. Just a simple, that just seems to make sense to her. I only told you because you asked me. So it makes me wonder, other people, Steve, are there others that have got info, but they haven't told us because we just haven't asked?
Yeah, and they're shy, and they don't want to talk about it. And what I find just so amazing is, out of all the people that described seeing it that night, they all called it the blue thing. I mean, the consistency is quite amazing. It really tells you that something happened. And to the people who suggest that these people are just trying to get attention, and I'm so tired of hearing that. These people obviously know nothing about this subject matter, and they're just going on the hearsay and the indoctrination that's been given to them by people who think this is all a joke.
Yeah, and the amount of people have said, oh, they were drunk. I said, look, guys, I came from an Irish family where drinking was a national sport,
Oh, yes.
And I see my family members drunk many a time, and I joined them, and I never hallucinated anything.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I mean, I think the drunkest I had ever been was when I worked on a movie with Oliver Reed, and we became friends. And we'd go out after shooting all day the film, and he'd take me out of the town. And I mean, we tried to drink each other under the table. We couldn't do it. We finally gave up. And
well, Oliver Reed's drinking was legendary.
I know, but he said, I can't believe it. He said, are you Irish? Or Russian? I said, I'm both, and he just goes. So
it's like my father was a coal miner all his life, Steve, and he worked down the coal mine, digging the coal. And I went out with a few of his friends, the mining community, and oh boy, I had a great friend from Scotland, and I've never seen anybody drink as much. But the point being, no matter how drunk anybody gets, I've never known them hallucinate anything. And then, well, they must be drugged. I said, well, no, they weren't drugged. They were in the sheriff's department within a couple of hours of this happening. And the sheriff waving his finger, saying, if you two guys are up to tricks, you're in big trouble. You know, you're going to
And
be
then
in big trouble.
and then there was the audio that they didn't know that was being recorded of them
Yeah,
when they left the interrogation room, and
yeah,
that
yeah. The secret
that
tape.
really that really showed how terrified and consistent they were about what happened to
Yeah,
them.
and that's the beauty of the APRO tapes that we received from David Marler, Steve, because they are literally from a couple of days after the event, you know, and it's involving all those around it. And we found that the late Philip Class, you know, he was the arch skeptic at the time. I met him once, and of course he tried to get in on the act with Pascagoula, and I have his complete case file on it. And when you read it, there's no research being done at all, Steve. He's just trying to
No,
throw mud.
Joe Nichols does the same thing, and
Yeah,
Michael Shermer of the Skeptical Inquirer also does the same thing. And I spent time with Michael, and he's a very nice man. But this is all a business to them, you know,
yeah.
and this is
Well,
something
what
that
Philip
they do.
Class said about the Pascagoula case, Charlie Hickson, within a few weeks, had a polygraph. And the polygraph examiner didn't come locally, he actually came from New Orleans. So Philip Class thought there's something fishy there. He forgot to mention that the polygraph examiner run the test 3 times on Charlie and he passed every time because he was skeptical himself and he thought if I keep giving him this test, eventually he's going to fail. But of course he didn't. So Philip Class said, well, this guy's not competent. He's not passed his exam. Well, he had. Now, it just so happened during the COVID lockdown, obviously we got time on our hands. I had tons of newspaper articles. I knew the name of the polygraph examiner. I even have a photograph of him. It's called Scott Glasgow, but it was the Pendleton Detective Agency. And hey presto, it was still going, Steve. It was still open. So I wrote to them the old-fashioned way. And they replied and they explained they knew all about it. And they said, yeah, he was qualified. He was just waiting for his certificate to arrive. It hadn't come through. But he was qualified. And the reason that they used somebody in New Orleans and not a local polygraph examiner, there were 2 in the Pascagoula area. One said, I'm not having anything to do with UFOs, forget it. The other one said, we only give polygraphs to people who've been charged with a crime. Mr. Hickson and Mr. Parker haven't been charged with any crime, therefore we're not going to do a polygraph on them. Now, when this incident happened, Charlie and Calvin were working at Walker's Shipyard. The boss said, you can use my attorney if you need him, a chap called Mike Kalingo. They didn't need him, but it was an offer made by the boss. Mr. Kalingo knew the Pendleton Detective Agency in New Orleans, and he said they can do the polygraph and they'll do it for nothing for us. So they got the polygraph and they didn't have to pay for it either, and he passed. The reason Calvin didn't take it at the time, because he'd gone back home. He didn't live in the area. He'd only gone there to work, and he ended up in the hospital with a breakdown. Otherwise, he would have had the polygraph as well. He lived in Laurel, Mississippi. I think it was, 100 and some odd miles away, fair distance. So we found that. And then back in 1973, one of the bridges that goes over the river, of course, took cars. That's what Mr. Anderson was driving over. But one of the criticisms back at the time was it was a toll bridge. So there was a bridge tender on operation all 24 hours a day. And so how come the bridge guy didn't see anything that night? So a local journalist went along and interviewed him, and he said, the rubbish, I didn't see anything, these guys are making it up. Turned out a UFO guy by the name, I think it was Richard Hayden, wrote to this bridge tender, and I have the copies of his letters, and he said, I was a bit harsh in that newspaper. I was actually busy doing something else at the time, because there's no traffic at that time of night anyway. So he wasn't
Right.
he wasn't looking out over the river. He was messing around in his little cab that he had. So those little things were put in the book because there were loose ends. So they're all in Pascagoula Uncovered as well. And just a couple of loose ends that got tidied up. And again, they came about after Calvin passed. I managed to find some of this material. And then one last thing for the book, Steve.
Right.
About a year after I got to know Calvin, he took ill. That's when he first took ill. We didn't know it was serious then. But I think Calvin did. I think he just had something in the back of his mind. He was due to actually come to the UK, but he just couldn't make it. He was too poorly. And he sent me a piece and he said, "You're not allowed to publish this until I die. You're not even allowed to tell my wife what's in it." So I kept it. And of course, he passed away. And I thought, what's the best way to make this available? So I put it at the end of the book, Calvin's last words. And it was I found it quite emotional because I still miss the old boy. We were like, I only had one brother, Steve, and he was older than me. Calvin reminded me in a lot of ways of my only brother, you know. So that, I guess, I used to nickname him my brother. So we have Calvin's last words, and they're in the book. Thankfully, he lived a bit longer than I think he expected to. I think he thought 2019, 2020, his days had come, but he managed to survive a few more years. But his last words are in the book as well. They're there for everyone to read and draw their own conclusions as well, of course.
Well, we won't talk about that here because we want people to read the book.
That would be nice.
Yeah, it would be nice. And, the problem I find with so many of the commenters is that they're not researched. They don't read the books, or they glance through them, or someone else tells them about something that was said in them. And after it goes through a number of people, it gets distorted. And you need to research this phenomenon yourself to be a good judge of it. That's the only way.
Yeah, I agree.
And the commenters, you can tell they don't do that. So,
no.
So
Well,
Philip,
that's one of the reasons that I got involved in this subject, Steve. I could have just sat there and, read the books and listened to the lectures like anybody else, long before the digital age, of course. But that wasn't enough. I wanted to know more, and if I wasn't able to encounter the phenomenon face to face, well, the next best thing is to speak to those that have, of course.
That's true.
And I'm very fortunate to be able to have done that.
So have you been continuing research on other cases in the UK?
Yeah. I mean, I'm one of these guys, Steve. I don't plan anything because I found in the past, if I plan things, it tend not to work. The plan fails. So I just work on whatever comes my way. I've not been in the best of health this last 12 months. So certain things have had to wait. But I published a book called Europe's Roswell by a chap called Mark Ollie. Now, back in 1983, on a local farm, the farmer got up one morning and found all this debris across his land. And in the forest as well as there's woods nearby. It was all gathered up. It looked like something had hit the treetops. And, it's built into a UFO story, etc., etc. Well, I've just managed to obtain some more pieces of this debris from the actual incident itself. And so what I'm in the process of looking into is maybe have these pieces analysed. The analysis has been done in the past. I'm not saying it hasn't.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody said, well, why are you doing it again? I thought, well, it'd be nice to do it again and see if the results are the same or different, and because it's there, the material is sat in front of me. I never thought when I first dipped my toes into the UFO pond that I would have pieces of an alleged UFO sat on my desk in front of me. It may turn out to be something, man-made, aircraft, helicopter, who knows? But I will get it's there in front of me. It's like why do you climb Mount Everest? Because it's there.
Because it's there. That's why
Why
we want
why
you.
do why do you have this stuff analysed? Because I've got it. What that's what I'm going to do. Either way, you get criticised, Steve. But I'd rather be criticised for trying to do something positive.
Yes, it doesn't matter what field of study you get into, whether it be archaeology or study of UFOs or any subject. Whenever you come across things that are outside the paradigm that most scientists and most researchers are comfortable with, and you push the outside of that envelope, you're going to get people that are going to criticize you and push back. And that's been that way all through the history of science.
Yeah.
So, and if it wasn't for people like you uh, pushing back and saying, well, let's have this analyzed, let's find out, maybe there's something more here. It's like what Dr. Gary Nolan says: if you take something off the table, then you'll be searching for eternity to find it again.
Yeah.
And so that's just good science and the way things should work. You shouldn't stick your nose up in the air about it. You should look hard at it. And then if it turns out to be just a piece of weather balloon or something, well, then you know that for sure. But if it is something else altogether different, then you really have a discovery there.
Well, that's
So,
it. Again, why am I doing it? Because I've got it. And what else do I do? Do I hang it from the ceiling? Do I use it as a paperweight? It just seems the right thing to do, Steve. You know?
right. Well, I'll be fascinated to take a look at your findings, and know more about that case. I would imagine that you do get phone calls and emails from your local area about people who have seen things or even experienced abductions, for lack of a better word. I don't really like that term, but nevertheless, there it is. Um, do you?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, not just locally, from all over the place.
Sure.
Especially when we've done a few documentaries, and you kind of know the documentary's being shown somewhere because you usually somebody contacts you and said, "Oh, I was watching it and I wanted to tell you about this."
Yeah.
Uh, so
No,
that's nice.
your face has been out there a lot lately, and that's a good thing because
Yeah,
you deserve the attention for the work you've been doing, because it's been very fine work and the books are incredible, and I can't wait to get all the way through the new one. Plus, I haven't seen all the doc. I saw the hypnosis. I need to see all the rest of them. But as you might imagine, you're kept incredibly busy with this once you become part of it,
yes,
and it's become a 7 day a week pretty much job. Although Mary and I tend to take off Sunday and get in the old 2-seater sports car and take a drive to the beach with the dog and other such things. But for the most part, most of us are very invested in this because we have a passion for it.
and it's
So
very difficult to walk away, especially if you've been involved for such a long time.
yeah, since
And
I'm a little boy.
yeah, and of course, a lot of my friends I've made are in this subject, not just here in the UK either, in different parts of the world.
Oh, sure.
My best friend is a Norwegian, and we met back in 1985. He was part of a UFO study called Project Hestalen in Norway. It's still going, and we've been the best of friends ever since. I've been in Norway and stayed with him. He's been here several times. So yeah, so
You meet you meet some amazing people and make really nice friends. I mean, just we met Dr. Irena Scott through Earl Grey Anderson, who is the state director in California for MUFON, and sadly, he passed away only a few weeks ago. He became ill with cancer very quickly, and
yeah.
we thought he was going to make it, and he didn't. Irena knows about this because they used to talk all the time. But it's a real pleasure to know her. We just talked to her on the phone the other day, and she's been on our show a couple of times. But we're talking more and more, and she's all impressed with my Hollywood work. I'm more impressed with her work, and your work. Because to me, it's Hollywood is great, and it's nice making all those monsters and aliens for movies, but this is the real thing, and it's just fascinating to me. So I want to thank you for doing another interview with us, Philip. It
My
means a lot
pleasure.
to me. It
No,
means a
my
lot to
pleasure.
me. And I know that the people in our audience, which are also your audience, will be really pleased to see this rather candid interview and all the information that you've brought forward on this case, uh, proving that it just wasn't slam dunk. There was so much more to come out over time, and it's just amazing. It's just really
Absolutely.
amazing.
Thank
Thank
you
you
very
so
much.
much.
Thank you, Steve. My pleasure.